Okay, so today we're going to be talking about solving polynomials. So here's an example of a polynomial, and well, it's kind of hard to solve that right now. So one of the things that we have to have in order to solve a polynomial is it has to be in factored form. We're used to standard form, the sum of 2 monomials, 3 monomials, so on. We need it to be in factored form. Factored means it's written as a product. So factored form of this looks like this. It's written as the product of two things. Okay? Here's another factored form, written as the product of two things. Could look like this, written as the product of two things. So each of these you guys have done as problems in order to get the standard form. However, today we're going to talk about why we actually want it to be in factored form. Because there's something in math that is called the zero product property. It says that if the product, or the answer to a multiplication problem, of two numbers is 0, then at least one of those numbers has to be 0, which is really just kind of common sense. If we know that we're multiplying two numbers and our answer is 0, well, one of those had to be 0, or both of them could be 0. Okay, so we're going to be using this zero product property to solve some polynomials. So here they are. We are going to solve them. We have a polynomial in factored form equal to 0. So we're going to use that property that says if the answer is 0, then one of these or both of these could be 0. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to say x could be 0. So this factor could be 0, or this factor could be 0. So x plus 8 could be 0. So in this case, then x would be -8. So there are two answers to this problem because this one could be 0, this one could be -8. My lights just went off. I was sitting too still. So, just kind of a preview ahead, and so you understand why the heck this actually has two answers. Just like we graph a linear equation, it makes a line. When you graph a polynomial, it makes what we call a parabola. You don't need to know this, but I just kind of want to point out what these two things are actually. So if I were going to be graphing this, here, this is just going to be a rough sketch. The parabola that kind of looks like a U, that means that it crosses through the x-axis at 0. So here's the x-axis, it crosses at 0, and over here at a -8. So the graph of this would look like that. So these two numbers that we're finding when we're solving the equation are actually these points right here. So these two things can be called quite a few things. We can call them solutions because they're answers to our problem. We can call them zeros. They're called that because those are the two things that are making the equation equal 0. Or we call them roots. They're the roots of the parabola. So quite a few different answers, or ways to call them answers: solutions, zeros, or roots. So let's say you came across this problem. It might say find the zeros. So what that means is, what would make this factor be 0? So we think, what number plus 6 is equal to 0? -6. And what makes this factor 0? 5. So what are my zeros? -6 and 5. Or I